good afternoon, or bonjour, Kiniwea. My name is Chief Dean Sayers. My spirit name that I'm referred to is Niminigoshingwayakasit, and it means flies with tilted wing, but still stands tall. And I am from the Crane clan, Blue Heron more particularly, and in our area here, in the territory that we inherited from our ancestors, the blue heron was really prominent. There is a lot of blue herons in the area, and I understand from my family that that's our reference. So as you learn more about clan systems, you'll probably come to generate a better understanding of that. I'm still learning too about the clan system. However, I know that it's a part of my history and a part of my family's understanding. We have been here at the center of the Great Lakes for as long as the waters have flowed. This is where we've always been. And contrary to a lot of the popular beliefs and things that are taught in mainstream schools, this is where everything started, and we never came from somewhere else. This is where we were placed. So we've had a really thorough, in-depth understanding of that history, and it's been orally handed down to us and our people in our villages here. It's not the only clan. There's a lot of clans in the area. The Ojibwe clans are really prominently represented in the area. But I just more or less talk about that as part of my introduction, because it's not my place to talk about the understandings of the other clans. But I know in our system, in our governance systems, there's a role for every clan, and every clan is just as important as other clans, and it creates that really cohesive society for us. And it's been in place for a long time. It's not just the last couple 100 years or last couple decades. We've had remnants, and we've had history and memory of clan processes and systems. And there are innate attributes. So when we talk about our history as a people, there are innate attributes, and there are ways of instilling or inciting or trying to gather that information so that we can present it in today's context. So we have ceremonies to help us with that recollection. So yeah, that's who I am, and thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit of insights from Bawating here at the center of the Great Lakes.
Which, thank you for sharing. Do you mind talking a little bit more about the history of this place? Maybe before settlers came, and what kind of activities would have happened during the summer, the spring moon cycles?
Sure. It was really a community that was really vibrant and healthy, and really well organized. Everything had a role, and everything had a place. And I think about in the clan system, like my name, it's flies with tilted wing, but still stands tall. And it's not just my name. It's part of the history of our people that's within that name, within the clan system. So in this particular instance, the role of myself and previous chiefs have been able to govern and look after the role of the external chief through, in my instance, a lens that isn't so concrete, that we look at it with tilted wing, because we have to be able to share another insight with our people, because sometimes we get complacent and we get really entrenched in our ways. So we have to always be open and ready for change. So part of my responsibility is to look at things a little differently and bring a different perspective to our people, so that we can always be prepared for change. So that's because our society, our community was so well organized and so beautiful, sometimes we weren't always open and ready to embrace change. So there was ways of being able to embrace change through our governance systems and our worldview that allowed us to maintain ourselves. So as I think about the overall Bawating Anishinaabe, we we had to be receptive and open to all kinds of things, because there was people coming in and out of our communities all the time in the center of the Great Lakes here, because all the waterways led here. All the Great Lakes come to a head to some degree in this area. And so we've been greeting and welcoming people from all around the Great Lakes and farther for forever. So as the host, we had to be well structured and organized. And they say Halley's Comet comes every 75 years or so. So we were able to see 3 Halley's Comets. That's how long we had lived. We had such a unique, beautiful recipe with creation and the environment, and we had such a synchronized way of life that we were able to, through all of those things, on average, live to be able to see 3 Halley's Comets. And when the elder was telling me that, I was saying, well, how could that be if they're 75 years apart? That's 75, 150, 225. So 225 years old? No, no, no. He said, when you're born, you'd see one. When you're 75 years old, you'd see one. And when you're 150, you'd see one. And he said that was where the 7 generations came from. When you were born, you could look forward and you could see 7 generations in front of you. And when you were 150 years old, you could look back and you'd see 7 generations. And when you're middle-aged, you could look forward, you might see 3 generations in front of you and 3 or 4 generations behind you. So he said that's our worldview, is always looking after the 7 generations. And so we lived a long time here. I remember my grandma, Louise, talking about how long we had lived, and she would tell me like her aunts and her family would live to be 130 years old, 125 years old, and she lived to be 97. And there's still a lot of our elders that live close to the land that live long, because they have that really beautiful relationship and understanding, and they eat in harmony with the land, and they live long when things are right as far as our original instructions are concerned. So it's quite the beautiful way of life that we have. Gifts were always a big part of our community living. Gifts of food, sharing food, communal feasting were a big part. Even growing up for me, we always feasted. We always had gatherings for whatever. And there's still a lot of gatherings in the community. And it was always a constant. So back in the day, like this is the time of the year. And I was just talking to my brother the other day. This is for us, it's if we were going to make a Bawating calendar, I think this month would probably be Whitefish Beach month, moon. Because at this time of the year is when the whitefish will go up into the shallow sandy beaches, and they would roll around in the sand, and they would prepare for their mating, and they would shine themselves up. Have you ever seen a whitefish? They're just shiny. They have a gleam to them, their scales, and that comes with work and effort. So they actually roll around in the sand, and they get ready for mating, and they pick mates and become attractive to their opposite sex. And then in the summer, they'll go into the deep water, and then the rest of the story is history. And so this time of the year, we follow the whitefish, and we'll be setting shallow. Our nets will set shallow. And it's really important for us to follow that. Yeah. There are so many beautiful insights and stories that come with our relationship with our Mother the Earth. And for the people in Bawating here, the Anishinaabe in Bawating and Batchewana, for us, whitefish is a really prominent part of our world, really a prominent part of our diet. Not only in the spring, not only in the summer, but every season it's really prominent. And our culture revolves around the fishery to a large degree. We were a fishing people here. We also looked after the watershed. But I wanted to share another story, a little story about the sturgeon. Because right now, also at the same time that we're catching the whitefish up on the beaches in the spring, it's May. We always have to be careful too, because right next to the whitefish, the sturgeon are also up in those same areas. And my dad was telling me, he said, the sturgeon, they're just like Anishinaabe. He said, they have a responsibility similar to us. We look after the land. They look after the land under the water. They are a blessed fish. They have a really important job on the part of creation. The Creator gave them a huge responsibility to look after the land under the water. And they're blessed. They're a blessed fish. And we're a blessed people. And he said, we have just as much, that's our brothers, we have just as much responsibility as them. And they've been around forever, and they still have their responsibilities. And you can tell them, you can tell they're archaic, they're really old. And he said, those are our relatives. And he said, in the language, we call them the Neme. Neme is sturgeon. And he said, you know what Neme means? He said, blessed, that's blessed fish. Neme is a blessed fish. And he said in the language, things that are blessed, we call them Neme. Like a church, he said, Neme Gamek is a blessed house. He said, it comes from our whole understanding of our relationship with the Creator. So he said, we really respect and we appreciate the sturgeon in their continued role with looking after the water, and we protect the water just like they do. We protect the land too. So those are the kind of worldviews that our elders still have. We also, in the summer, there's the mating that's going on with the whitefish, but in the fall, the whitefish will actually prepare to spawn. And the whitefish work with creation. So they call them the equinoctial winds will start in October, November. And that's when we, as a people, we don't fish. We have some rules in our fish management plans, and we don't fish for a few weeks there when those big winds are happening on Lake Superior on Gitchigame. And when those big winds are happening, they're actually washing the big boulders and the areas on Lake Superior for the whitefish to spawn. So we respect that new life, and we don't fish then. And you'll see those big winds and those big waves, and that's part of the natural cycle. And the whitefish are all up in those areas, and right after they're done, they're spawning. Then we fish again. It's a bountiful time. That's probably the most bountiful time for our people to gather fish and to gather food, and it really helps for the long winter. And they say that here in Bawating, that you could walk across the backs of the whitefish. They were so available, so prominent, and it was able to sustain us. And a lot of people would come here at that time of the year to trade as well. So there was not only fresh fish, but there was dried fish, there was smoked fish, and anything you can imagine with fish. So there was trading and there was gifting that was happening in the fall of the year. But not only in the fall of the year, there was our culture and our way of life, our monetary system was trading and gifting each other, giving gifts to each other. And when we would gather, when we'd move from village to village, if we went down into Lake Huron, we would go to visit our relatives down there. And when we'd come, we would bring things that we would make snowshoes, we'd bring food, dried fish, and we'd bring berries, we'd bring whatever, rugs. We made rugs here, we made baskets, and we'd bring all of that stuff. And we would, a lot of times we would even start throwing it in the water before we landed on the shore in the summertime, and people would come out and the kids would be happy, they'd get maple candy. It was just a big celebration where our families and our relatives would get together with the other villages. And that's where we would trade, and everybody knew what this auntie would make in this community, and they would look forward to her coming, and they'd trade something with her. And it was commerce, it was trading, and that's how we were able to manage each other's our nations. So trading with gift giving was a really big part of our worldview, and it's innate. It's a part of who we are. As I watch and learn from the elders about our really well-defined governance systems, I think about how when the settlers came here, they saw this way of life, but they also saw the the richness of the land, the opportunity of the land, and they also were well aware that we were the first government. We had governance rights, and that they were wanting to impede that and be a part of that, but they just couldn't come in and say we're taking it. So they had to go through a lot of processes to get what they wanted as settlers on our lands. And they had to go through protocols with us on what that would look like in order to be able to share in our inheritance and in what we had inherited from the Creator. So you saw things start to happen with gift giving. So they started to give gifts at treaty time. We want some land and we want some resources. So if you share your lands and resources with us, we'll give you gifts. And we'll give you gifts every year, and we'll come and we'll bring gifts to you, similar to what we would always done as a people. And as things evolved in time, there was that change to money, and there's a really beautiful picture that I have of Niminegoshing, or the people of Bawating, making our way down to Manitowoc to receive the gifts from the Crown, and we all, in honor of our commitment to the treaty relationship. And when we made these really beautiful promises, that's what we called them, was Bawindimagi, when it's the promises that we made to other governments as a people. We took those very seriously, and we still take them really seriously today. We don't shrug our responsibilities. We fulfill those promises to whoever they may be with, whatever government that they may be with, whether they be with the British, the French, the Lakota, the Haudenosaunee, or whoever. We follow through on our commitments. And a lot of the perspective that I'm sharing are I don't have any original thoughts. These are different elders and knowledge keepers that have shared different things with me over the decades in helping me being able to do the job that I need to do to move the yardstick with regards to the fulfillment of promises that were made to us when we were sharing, and how we were going to continue to relate to our lands. So that's where those things come from. And when I think about the treaties and the commitments and the promises, because there's no real, in our language, there's no word for treaties, it's promises. And we talk about it and we take inventory of the promises. We've had a lot of promise relationships with a lot of nations. And we as a people are a nation, and we are still a nation. We still have our own land that we inherited. We have our own law. We have our language. We have our people. And we have our unique culture. We are everything that it is to be a nation. And we make treaties or agreements or promises with other nations. We don't make promises and those types of levels of agreements unless they are at that level. And when we do those, we have those witnessed by all of creation. And even in the wampums, because we also utilized wampums as a way of making promises with other nations. And we have wampums with other indigenous nations, wampum treaties. And those belts, those wampums are spiritual. They help record and hold the promises. And sometimes you'll hear the recital of those belts. And it's a spiritual time. The people that recite those invoke spirit and have spirit help them remember what the recital needs to look like. And in those belts, that wampum, those shells, they come from, and they are created in witness of, and those shells come from the deepest oceans. So all of creation, from our grandfather's sun all the way to the deepest oceans, are witnessing. Everything in creation witnesses the promises that we make to each other in those belts. and those belts are represented on the wampum. Those shells are represented on that belt, and they come from the deepest ocean. So whatever we promise in those agreements are really a strong commitment. It's stronger than a handshake. It's stronger than a document, because everything watched, everything is witnessed. All of our ancestors are called for that ceremonially. All the animals watch that. All of the plants, all the trees, everything in creation watches what we're doing, and they witness that. And those types of promises, like treaties, are made in ceremony. And when we strike the flint, that's when we ask them all to come and witness. And that sound is what calls them. And there's many other things that happen. We call the spirit, and our spirits have to connect at the time. So if we're going to have a promise or a treaty with, let's say, the Lakota people, they have to be in the lodge so our spirits can connect. And all the spirits are there, a part of this ceremony. You can't, when we're making that promise, the spirits have to connect so that it can continue to stay alive as a living promise forever. It's a living treaty, a living agreement. You can't send somebody on your behalf. So when treaties in the area started to happen with the newcomers to our land, there was some concerns around, well, if this country or this nation wants to enter into a treaty with us, why are they not here? And because our spirits have to connect, and the piece of paper or the handshake doesn't do it. So we had some concerns about that. And what I understand, an elder shared with me one time, he said they needed to get what they wanted, the settlers, from us. And we were reluctant to enter into the treaty because we prepared to have this really important decision to be made. It was important for us. We sent our leaders, our spirits were there. Our own spirits in leadership also joined us in those opportunities to enter into these agreements, and they didn't send a representative there. So they decided, the settlers decided to create these medals, and these medals had pictures of the crown or the leader of that nation on one side, and they showed us that, and they said he or she can't be here, the queen or the king, but they sent their likeness, and the leadership were thinking, well, it's still not, your spirit's not here. But they decided, they had some discussions internally amongst our people. And for us, there is a window into the spirit world. One of the windows to the spirit world is through the shine on the water, that glimmer. And it's a spiritual window. And we didn't have mirrors, and this was a shiny metal, so it was a window into the spirit world. So they said, well, maybe that spirit is here. Maybe they are here. They sent their likeness. That's them. So they found some comfort in the ability to enter into this relationship with the crown and their representatives based on these medals, and the spirit of that leader of that nation sending their likeness, sending their spirit here through that medal. So we entered into these promises, and you'll see those old pictures of some of the chiefs. They're saying, look at, they're saying this is the medal, and they'll be holding up this medal like that, or they'll have pictures of themselves with medals. They're not saying, look what I got. They're saying, I remember what you promised me in this medal. So your spirit is here. And it's really important for them to point to this. I remember the promises you made. So you'll start to see historically a lot of the chiefs will be holding up these medals, and it's remembering the promises. And the paper, you don't see them holding up the paper. They're holding up the promise that was witnessed by all of creation. And you'll start to see over time the presentation of these medals, and it became a practice. At least that's from our worldview, what had happened, from what I understand. And when I came on as the chief quite a few years ago now, one of the previous prime ministers called me and said, we want to present you with a medal. in honor of your chief that helped during the War of 1812. His name was Chief Wabachichuk, Ongima Wabachichuk, White Crane. And he died on the battlefield in 1813 down at Fort George, down in Niagara. And they wanted to honor our participation, so they presented me with one of those medals. And that's what I was thinking about when I received this medal. It was an honor, but it brought to light for me the promises that the Crown made to us, and it reminded me that we still have a lot of work to do to have the fulfillment of those promises take place, and hopefully sooner than later. So promises were a really big part of how we governed with other nations throughout history. And there's many examples of some of the things that were promised to us. I remember one, there was this belt that represented the crown, and at the other end of the belt there was the land, and between us were identified all these leaders, Anishinaabe leaders, chiefs were represented on this belt, and what it was about was that if we continued to share our lands and our resources with the newcomers, all we had to do was to, as these leaders, we were tied to our lands and the ship was on the other end. All we had to do was pull on this rope and the ship would come with the best wood. And the chiefs, all they had to do was pull on this rope. Eventually it became contemplated using iron instead of rope. Eventually it became silver. But what they talked about was, and the elders tell me about this, was that they wanted us to sign this or to endorse this, and they were going to give us the best wood. And for us, we didn't really worry so much about the money, but for us, wood was important. And growing up even, I remember in the village, it was important. Wood was important. Everybody knew wood. We knew the types of wood. We knew what the best wood was for burning in the wintertime. We knew which wood had a nice bright flame but didn't throw any heat. And we knew what kind of wood was too hot that would burn a hole in your stove. Like, we knew everything about wood. We knew about drying it properly. We knew about safety with wood so that you didn't burn your house down, what kind of wood you'd use and how you dry it. Wood was a science for us. So I think what happened was that representatives of wherever they came from around the world that came here, they watched us and wondered, how can we get what we want? So they started to say things like, we'll give you the best wood. Or they also watch us on the other side of that, on one side of one of those medals that were a reflection of the promises was a picture of a pile of wood and a chief and representative of the crown. And what that represented was that they were giving us the best wood in exchange for the promise, in exchange for entering into the promise. On the other side was a picture of the crown, whoever the king or the queen might have been, and they had a picture of grandfather's son on there. And what the elders told me was that they had promised to become grandfather's son for us because we really respected grandfather's son. He never forgot his original responsibilities. Without fail, every day, grandfather's son would rise. He was predictable. And we tried to be that way. We want to be that way. We want to be predictable. We want to be dependable. We want to be able to look after all of our responsibilities, including our families, ourselves, our community. We want to be like grandfather's son. And even though the clouds may cover and we don't know grandfather's son is there, he's there. He's always there. And grandfather's son lights our day. Like, he provides light for us. He warms our world and nourishes all of creation. So we want to be like grandfather's son, and we give thanks for grandfather's son. We appreciate grandfather's son, and we ceremonialized grandfather's son, and we recognized that grandfather's son had a really great relationship with the Creator, and we wanted grandfather's son's assistance to help us with that communication with the Creator. So the representatives of the Crown noticed that. So they said, we'll be grandfather's son for you. We'll be dependable. We'll light your day. We'll provide you warmth. We'll look after you. Sign these agreements with us. and we'll give you the best wood. We'll give you ammunition. We'll give you nets. We'll give you pots. And if ever you need any more, just pull on that rope and we'll bring you a ship laden with anything that you ever may need if you continue to share with us. That was the kind of relationships that were starting to evolve. Gift giving, trade, sharing, and we never really we never forgot. We still hold up those medals, and we still remind the Crown periodically of the promises that they made. And eventually, throughout the treaties over time, the gifts would change, and we would gather as Anishinaabe at different places over time, and throughout a couple of hundred years there, up till the early 1800s, and we would take receipt of gifts. They'd always bring gifts for us, and we'd stand there and we'd get gifts to keep the treaty relationship alive. And we were doing that right up till I think around the 1840s, when they started to give money instead. And in this area, they started out with the treaty, the Robinson Treaty, and that one started out at $1.60, and it eventually went up after a few years, about 20 years or so, to the $4 a year, and that was our share of the value of the resource extraction, and it was dependent on how much money was made on the land. Because you got to remember too, we were at the center of the Great Lakes here, and we had an economy. Before the 1850 treaty, we were actually issuing mining permits. We had a process around managing and sustainably looking after the copper, the silver, the gold, all the resources, forest products. We were actually, we were already a couple hundred years that we were involved with the new governments here. So we had an economy, we were doing forest products and etc. So we said, well, sure, we'll enter into a treaty with you, but we want to maintain our quality of life, and we want to have a share. We want to have, and when you make money, we'll make money, just like we've always done. We've always been able to benefit and manage the resources in a good way. So that was the 1850 treaty, the Robinson Treaty. We were adamant, and we were actually, Batchewana is number 15 out of the 16 bands that signed that treaty. And that's because we held out. We were adamant that that was going to be the case. And we ended up eventually signing the treaty. But it wasn't exactly how we had envisioned the relationship to look like. Because there was some real reluctance on the part of the Crown with following through on how we envisioned the relationship to look like, because it was a struggle. There was annuities paid to treaty rights holders in Southern Ontario and in the United States, and we knew that there was a possibility, but eventually it did come through. But within a few years of the treaty, we recognized that there wasn't a real a seriousness on the part of the Crown to fulfill that, and it became problematic for us. Out of necessity, we entered into the Robinson-Huron Treaty. It wasn't quite a necessity for us, but it was the Crown that had a necessity to enter into this treaty, because we found out in 1849 that there was a copper mine that was operating illegally up the coast. And so we borrowed a cannon and we went up there and we shut it down. And of course, by the time the military got here, they arrested our leadership, my great-great-great-grandfather, and took him down to York, down to Toronto, and he was ordered released. And that's when they were told by the Governor General, don't forget the Royal Proclamation, that you need a treaty if you want to have a share of the wealth on the lands up there. So that's what prompted the Robinson-Huron Treaty. So the Robinson-Huron Treaty, it was really based on the legalization of a copper mine. It wasn't about fishing, it wasn't about hunting, it wasn't about moose, it wasn't about all the forest products. It was basically a sharing relationship that was focused on the extraction of the natural resources, in particular the mining industry. So contrary to a lot of the beliefs of the Canadian government, who inherited this obligation, there was no surrender, an absolute surrender of our underlying title to the land. there was no absolute surrender of our obligation, inherent obligation to look after the fish, the trees, the water, the moose, the wolves, all the animals, and there was no surrender of those things. Actually, July 1st, 1867, the first Prime Minister of Canada tried to extinguish our rights in the treaty. And he made a declaration that he was going to look after Indians and lands reserved for Indians, which to our chagrin, we said, what the heck is this guy talking about? You can't unilaterally say, I'm going to become your father and I'm going to make decisions for you. I'm going to be your trustee. That was a violation of our law. We never agreed to Canada taking on the responsibility of looking after us, basically negating the treaty fulfillment obligations. So in his role as the trustee, he started to eradicate and remove a lot of our inherent jurisdictions and rights. There was nothing in the treaty about all those jurisdictions I just talked about. So Canada assumed jurisdiction over everything. They assumed jurisdiction over the fish. They assumed jurisdiction over the forest, over the moose, etc. And they made it illegal for us in the 1850s to hire a lawyer to fight it. And you weren't allowed to sue or legally challenge the Crown. And eventually, Canada became representatives of the Crown, so you couldn't sue them till just recently, the last couple of generations. It was really problematic for us. And in the meantime, we had to be quiet and not say anything. But we never forgot. And now it's legal. But in the meantime, the Crown really did a poor job of managing the resource, and really to the demise of our Mother the Earth and the quality of life for everybody. It was not managed properly. And I think about that, like in regards to the fishery, what the Ontario and the federal government supported was the lobbying on behalf of the Anglers Association, people that fish for fun with fishing rods. And I enjoy doing that too, but not so much so that my practices are going to affect the environment. So they lobbied to have the salmon introduced to the Lake Superior. And those are not native species, they're a carnivore. So they came in and they ate all the fingerlings, all the baby trout, all the baby whitefish. And then of course Ontario said, well, we'll fix that, we'll plant them. But they didn't take off either, so you'll find a lot of planted fish. The natural native fish are coming back now, but they also introduced smelts. And smelts, I remember my dad saying around 1941 they introduced smelts. And they really played havoc on the fishery. The smelts started to, they were eaten by the trout, but the trout weren't equipped to properly digest them, and the smelts were so acidic that they caused stomach issues with the trout and ate holes in the trout's stomach, and they were dying. And the trout eventually bounced back, because now I remember when I was fishing in the 80s there, when we get a native trout, you could tell that had a nice color. It didn't have a clipped fin, because each time they plant fish in Lake Superior, the M&R will clip a fin this year, this fin they'll clip this year, the next year they'll clip this one, and then they can tell by the weight and where you catch it. They can tell whether or not their planting system is working. So when we get one that wasn't clipped, we celebrate. Finally, we're starting to get fish that are kind of bouncing back. So now there seems to be a lot more fish that are doing well. But they really upset the balance, and they were introducing invasive species, and they still have these invasive species like salmon in the Great Lakes, like the smelts. So we reclaimed the fishery, and we went to court and we won. And so now we are the largest fishery on the eastern Lake Superior area. We have our inherent rights being exercised by all of our captains in all of our villages, and we don't take a license from Ontario. And we're working on the actual reversal of roles, and I'm pretty sure that before long we'll be actually issuing the fishery permits to everybody in eastern Lake Superior. We don't really see a lot of the value in the regulations that you'll find with the management of the fishery right now that's operated under the M&R. And so that's transitioning back as far as we believe, as far as the recognition of our unextinguished jurisdictions over the fishery. Similarly, we find a lot of the practices that are happening on the land today, in particular around moose management. The moose are having some reproductive issues right now. as well as some of the other animals. The clear cutting has really played havoc on a lot of the species, including the bears and the wolves and the moose. But in regards to reproductivity, we're finding that there are birthing issues, there are multiple births, there's deformities, there's sometimes a lack of ability to reproduce. And not only is it because of the clear cutting, but the governments, the new governments, to save money, they decided to start to aerial spray instead of going under and underbrushing and doing a proper forest management system, a sustainable forest management system. It's more of an economic-based forest management system. It's not really aligned with historic forest management practices that we had, and it's really damaging to every facet of our life. It really has a huge effect even on climate change. So we are reclaiming our inherent jurisdiction, our inherent obligations, and we will be fulfilling those inherent rights and obligations and promises we made to the Creator. The lens that the Anishinaabe see the world through, and even myself, is not just something that's been fabricated in the last 50 years. A lot of the things that have been shared with me in my role as the Gima are really ancient understandings. And as an example, when we are out on the land and we're fulfilling our obligations to creation, you can feel it and you can see it when the spirits actually respond and appreciate and know that you're trying and know that you're going to be going back to embrace the essence of those original instructions. And I remember one time when we reclaimed an area that was stolen on us, and a couple hundred of us went in and we reclaimed this area, and we fed the spirits in that area, and we went to the water and we made this spirit plate. And the elder, the grandma, went with us, and she showed us how to do everything from one of our villages, and she made this feast and this plate, and she went down to the water, and that water spirit, actually, we were all, a couple hundred of us standing there watching, and she emptied the plate into the water, and really calm, and all of a sudden you seen this little ripple in the water coming, and that ripple came up and it grabbed that food on the beach, and it right on the edge of the water, and you could see that food being pulled down. You could watch it about maybe 10 meters away from you. You could gradually see it, and it went right over the drop off and disappeared. And that was that water spirit that had come and really appreciated that we were there, and we promised that we would do that ceremony. We would come back and feed the spirits and look after them, because they were still working and they were still doing their original instructions, what they were supposed to be doing here to help all of creation. And that's just one example. So we as a people have a recipe to look after this part of our Mother the Earth. And that recipe, those instructions were shared with our people. We've been able to share those with today's younger people, with families. We're still learning from our elders how to do that. And sometimes when there's a piece missing, we'll work with our pipe carriers to get that piece for us. And they'll come back and they'll say, this is what we need to do here, or this is what we can do here. So we are really trying to embrace governance from an Anishinaabe worldview. And when we do that, we need to reflect and incorporate spirit. So our governance, our way of life, is hand in hand with spirit. And it's more than just a textbook. It's being on the land. It's being in touch with the trees. It's being in touch with the birds. When you do something really beautiful and you're aligned with those teachings, the eagles will appear. One time we reinterred 6 of our ancestors that were stolen in the 1830s, and they ended up in the Smithsonian in Washington. We eventually brought them home, and we had this wonderful procession. Thousands of people came out to watch, thousands and thousands, because we brought them across in birch bark canoe across the St. Mary's River here. And I was coming across, paddling across the St. Mary's, and there was all these little coffins. These we were carrying them, and you could, as you got closer to the shore on the Canadian side, you could see thousands of people lining the shoreline of the St. Mary's from the city of Sault Ste. Marie, because it was a big media event. And then the city police escorted us out of Sault Ste. Marie. We put all of them in the back of a half-ton truck, and we went to our traditional cemetery. And when we got there, we had about 19 pipe carriers. So we had these 19 pipe carriers, and we had these 6 graves dug on the shore of Lake Superior up on a cliff. And there were 6 of them, side by side, east, west. And we brought them out, and we smoked all our pipes. We had spirit houses made, and we made a feast, and what a powerful ceremony. And as we lowered them in, and we were smoking our pipes, and we were putting the spirit houses there, at the same time 6 eagles flew in right in front of us, right down in front of the pipe carriers, right in front of the people, one at a time. They came, each one after another, 6 of them came down, and what a powerful, and the media was there, and it's in the media, there's stories, if you looked it up, you'd say they couldn't believe it either, like incredible, beautiful. So when we as a people, we fulfill those original inherent responsibilities, and we look after spirit, not only will we benefit, but all of creation will benefit. When you do good things, when you do really beautiful, wonderful things, all of creation, all the animals, all the spirits, the Creator likes that, and good things will come your way. So it's really a beautiful way of life, and I hope that you find some value and benefit, and take what you can from what I'm sharing, but more importantly, go out there, be Anishinaabe. You need to help us. You need help. We need people to hear these words and other teachings. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many other beautiful worldviews that are available for you to reap from your discussions with the elders in your communities. They have all these things. Just got to look for it. Sema will help. Tobacco will help. They'll help you get where you need to go and who you need to talk to. So miigwech, Professor. And these promises, they came in many forms. You want to start over again?
No.
What?
Because you were.
Okay.
You were that's fine.
All right.
Catch
my breath here.
Okay.
Okay, let's try it again.
Okay.
All right.